Welcome to today's episode, the podcast where we discuss the most recent installment of a different series every show. It is Tuesday, August 25th, big day for telescopes.
Is that the first day that the telescope was invented?
Not the first day that a telescope was invented, but it was the first time that Galileo demonstrated his first
Mm.
telescope, August 25th, 1609, to the lawmakers and merchants of Venice. Now, the Merchant of Venice was actually written within 10 years of that, like I think 10 years prior. And then 200 years later, on August 25th, 1835, there was the Great Moon Hoax. Have you heard of the Great Moon Hoax?
No.
This was where a little-known paper called the New York Sun released a set of articles claiming real-life astronomer Sir John Herschel used a giant telescope and found lush vegetation, intelligent creatures, including bipedal beavers, unicorns, and of course 4-foot-tall winged man bats on the moon. And so this went out in the papers, and everybody was believing it. And then slowly but surely the scientific community weighed in and said, no, this is a joke. This was meant to just make the paper more popular, and it did. But also Edgar Allan Poe said that's plagiarism. He he had his own story apparently, which had been out there, and he accused. I don't think he accused John Herschel, but I think he accused the paper
Yeah,
of
right.
taking his story.
That reminds me so much of Orson Welles
Right,
and
and
War of the
that's
Worlds.
the exact connection I wanted you to make, because that was almost a century. I think it was 103 years later.
Mhm.
That is when Orson Welles did the War of the Worlds radio broadcast.
Right, that got him Citizen Kane, I think, in the end.
So,
But
like,
yeah.
one time is one time, two times is a coincidence. We're looking at a pattern, and what's important with the pattern is, like, okay, in 1835 you had
I know where
the
you're going with this. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You had the newspaper coming out with this hoax, and then you had Orson Welles talking about the apocalypse.
Right.
And then now we're about 100 years later. So with AI the way it is, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some massive hoax conspiracy that gets released soon that a bunch of people already buy into.
I just don't imagine it becoming as widespread or even maybe people caring as much as they did back then.
You feel that like everybody has seen with what AI can do, it has become so
Yes.
superfluous that like people have kind of become desensitized to it.
Yes, and with the amount of people that think that things are fake,
Right.
I
There's
feel
already a
like
conspiracy going.
right.
Well,
So
maybe it's the opposite effect. Maybe everybody will start believing in things again. I don't know. But pattern detecting is what I wanted to talk about mostly because in this show that we're talking about, Blood Sacrifice, a common practice in police procedurals or any sort of detective is predicting behavior to solve mysteries. And this is a mystery. The first episode ends with the main character predicting that the cop killing serial killer that he's chasing is about to strike again because based off of the prior two attacks. So that's where the patterns come into play. This is a Swedish crime drama centered in Stockholm. Netflix put out the full first season on Thursday.
5 episodes.
The title is Blood Sacrifice, but in Swedish it is Bloodsoffer. It's like blood offer.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have anything to do with like supernatural vampires or satanic
Right. I
rituals.
wanted to ask you about the question because I hear blood sacrifice for this TV show, and I think to myself, like gore, like I'm doing demons, like hell. I'm thinking that it's a horror trope TV show. I would not think that it was a Scandinavian noir.
I think it's meant to sell the public on watching it, but also it might turn into that. Who knows? If there's a vampire in episode 5, we're just talking about the pilot here. It's about 45 minutes. It's a tight 45 minutes, and it really is a father-son team-up show trying to stop a serial killer who is on the loose. The pilot begins with the murder of 2 police officers, Helena and David, and they're responding to a distress phone call that came in at 1:15 a.m., and that's very important. Also, I just want to point out, they don't go by 911. If you're in the US, you call 911. They go by 112,
112, yeah.
and that made it a little confusing because they kept on saying that the phone call was at 115, and they called that on 112. And so I was confused for a while whether or not there was a 3-minute difference, but really, no, that was the number they called.
Well, it's interesting because George Kay, he co-created the criminal franchise Lupin and Hijack,
Okay,
if you
so
remember.
those are Apple series, right?
Yes. Well,
Well,
Lupin, I think
Lupin's
was Netflix.
Netflix, but Criminal is the one with the Doctor Who guy, right?
hmm Yep, and then Hijack also. But Lupin was French, and this is the first Scandinavian show that he's done, or Swedish show. And so what he would do is he would write the scripts in English, and then he would send it to Swedish screenwriters. They adapted it and ensured, like, culturally and regionally that everything kind of made sense. Send it back to George K, and then George K would sign off on it when he thought that the changes were okay that they made.
That's fantastic because one of the things I wanted to talk about is how the American system, legal system, differs from the Swedish one and also from like other European ones. If you remember the Amanda Knox show that we did,
Right.
the Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox,
Yep.
a big portion of that is talking about how the prosecution like is so involved with the case. The prosecutor is actually the one leading the investigation, and that caused so much turmoil in her life because the prosecutor really had it out to get her.
Yes, I do
And
remember that, yeah.
and the US doesn't work like that. It's like we have the cops and they're kind of a separate entity, or they're supposed to be. And then you have them once they catch someone, then the prosecution team decides whether or not they want to charge that person. But the cops and the prosecution are not supposed to be in cahoots with each other. It's not supposed to be the prosecuting attorney leading investigations. Now, this show, it kind of falls in the middle ground where you have the prosecution has found someone that they're pinning for one of the murders that happens early on before we even like start the show.
Right.
And our main detective here is a little afraid of stepping on their shoes. In fact, he's going out of his way. That's why he brings his father aboard, who is a retired cop, rather than going through all the proper channels because he realizes that the prosecution is absolutely not going to want to admit to the public that they've made a mistake and caught the wrong guy.
Yep.
So that is kind of the basis for this. And I just found it kind of an interesting thing how the world separates the way that we do the legal process.
2 questions for that. One, you said that he brought along his father, and I know that that's kind of the basis for the show, but you said he was retired. Was he not fired? Because I thought that I read that
He
he
was
was
refired.
refired.
It's like retired and refired. He was forced out for being a little sexist and also for just he drinking on the job. So this episode follows, like I said, lead detective Thomas Berg. He turns 45 within the first episode. It takes place over the course of one specific week. It connects the double homicide. He is connecting a double homicide of, like I said, Helena and David to the cop killing of Marina, which happened a few weeks earlier,
Mhm.
but in a different precinct. So he only has control of the Stockholm precinct, and Marina's murder was in this whole other one, and that's where they've caught this guy that they assume did that murder.
My
And so
second my second question was this like a Dexter scenario where the guy was trying to take credit for it, or did they just genuinely catch the
we
wrong
haven't
guy?
heard anything directly from Victor. We've only seen from cross scenes like in the background when they've done news things of him
Reels, yeah.
being yeah, where he's being kind of like ushered from the court into to the police station and stuff like that. So we haven't actually met Victor yet.
Okay.
We just know his name. But yeah, so Thomas is following up this lead. He's got it in his head that these cases are connected, and he goes to his bosses, first Rebecca, and then I think Lucas, who is like the chief, and Lucas pushes back, but he does say, I'll let you use one of your other staff to follow this lead, no one else. And so Thomas does choose one other person, and then I think it's Natalie, and then he also goes and connects with his dad and says, hey, his dad is considered kind of like a misanthrope. He's like a model train enthusiast. He's curmudgeonly, and I would also say kind of a hoarder.
Yeah.
So like he's got his own problems, but his name is Alfred, and they have an estranged relationship.
Prior to this show, I thought just from a glance at the poster that Alfred was played by Brian Cox.
Yes, yeah.
So I thought that this was just going to be a TV. So I kept
Well-
on waiting for the show to turn into English at any point, and then I was like, "Oh wait, no, that's actually not him."
I think he's Scottish, if I remember correctly, but I knew it wasn't him. I just find his mannerisms and his grouchiness like very Brian Cox-esque. Yeah, so by the end of the episode, Thomas and his dad have worked it out. They're at the last scene of the crime, and they've concluded that this serial killer is not only at large, but also they've predicted when he's going to strike again. Because every time that he has killed, what he's done is or not every time, I guess the first one would have been a little different. He makes the phone call at 1:15 a.m.
Mm.
and then he uses the previous victim that he'd tortured as their voice. Like, he recorded their voice, played it back for the police so they think that there's something immediately happening, and then he lures the police to a new house, and then he kills those officers. And he does it at a time of day because this is midsummer, which means that it does not get dark very
Yeah.
often in Stockholm. So he waits until 1:15, which is one of the few hours of the day that it actually is dark, to do this ritual.
One of the reasons why George K was so big on making it was that they could use the natural light from Stockholm, so they weren't going to have to like have use
Yeah.
as much money to do that.
And I didn't know because I'm not the geographer, like I haven't been there, but there's like 14 islands there.
Yeah.
So it's the archipelago. So it's not just Stockholm. Like Thomas is in charge of a whole different like area. It's like
Yeah, and
it's widespread.
I think that the thing about the Swedish language too is that it's not as complex as other languages. So I know that he
Oh,
said that was
shots
kind of easier.
fired.
Well, it's interesting because what you're describing reminds me a lot of like Hannibal. I know a lot of the episodes of that TV show focused on how the murders were displayed. It also reminds me of Memories of Murder when you talk about them tracking and being able to predict where the next murder is going to take place based
Yeah,
off a pattern.
yeah. A couple of things to say to that. One is that in the crime scene that we see a lot of blood splatter,
Right.
blood sacrifice. Okay, but we never see the bodies besides in pictures. We're told that they had their heads cut off. That the two officers, Helena and David, had their heads cut off. I don't think Marina did because I think they have pictures of her getting sliced in the neck.
But you never see them get beheaded.
But we see the crime scene a ton of times. And then as you were talking about the language, it did occur to me there were a couple words in there, kind of like in Indian dramas that we've done, where they splice in English a little bit.
Yeah.
And then there were some words that are very similar to like Polish and stuff. Like I think talk, it doesn't mean yes in Swedish, but it does mean like something around that. Like I was recognizing some words and I was surprised by that. So that was cool.
When it came to like the ritual framing, yeah, and I say that because again, blood sacrifice, based on how the bodies of the cops were posed, I know that you said that you never really saw them, but what message do you think, at least right now, that the killer is trying to send to the police?
Well, that gets into the clues that we're left with because you don't chop off someone's head, especially with like a serrated kitchen knife.
Yeah.
That would be very, very difficult to do unless you are mad about something, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I assume that Thomas is figuring out that maybe he's mad that this other guy has been arrested for what he was doing, but it does feel more targeted. Like, why would you go after specifically cops? Why are you going across Sweden to commit these murders? But there's a lot of clues that we get by the end. We find out that he absolutely has been recording the previous officer's death in order to. That was the big twist, and it happens when Thomas and his dad go to Marina's mom, and they aren't supposed to be talking to her because she's again part of a different precinct, like investigation. But they don't exactly tell her that they're there for this purpose. They just want to match her voice to the more recent victim's phone call that was pulled in there.
Was there anything off from that beginning scene when you heard the fake emergency call that made you
One thing I like
realize that?
about the show is they play it so much, and you had to know once they played it the second or third time that there was a reason for it. I couldn't pick up on anything. All the person was saying was, "Oh no, they're breaking in. They have a knife. Please help," something like that. But like the reason was because they wanted the audience to recognize later on when it was Marina's voice talking about her mom's, like, I forgot what event that she was playing back, but her mom had a recording of her daughter. So that was helpful. The other thing is that he's wearing tennis shoes. The killer is.
Yeah.
They found 2 sets of tennis shoes, and they think that he switched them in order to make it seem like there were more people there.
Do you think that that possibly could be staged? Because I know
Well, yeah,
one.
that's what I'm saying. Is like
Yeah.
that he's wearing separate tennis shoes to stage that there are more people.
I get what you're saying now. One of the one of the things they were inspired by was Seven, which
Oh,
kind of it gives library books vibes in that same way with the tennis shoes.
I thought you were saying chopping off chopping off heads.
That
Yeah.
makes sense as well, but where it feels like the killer is smart enough to has just kind of left false leads everywhere. That's at least what I was thinking when I was reading the description for this.
There's also something very strange about the killer is that they are going to these really expensive houses. This one happened to be sort of an Airbnb, which gets rented out, and they interview the guy who owns it. He didn't know anything about this, but no one was supposed to be staying there. So he's locating, there's a lot of preset like planning going on. He finds an empty giant house, then calls the police to that house, and then he kills them. So it really does show a form of planning that they want to make this for we got two super cops in Thomas and Alfred. Alfred's going to be like watched closely by Thomas to make sure he doesn't fall off the wagon. At the end of the first episode, they're even saying, okay, we've gotten the big twist here. You can go off and do your own thing. Like Alfred is telling Thomas, like, I'm glad I could have helped now, but obviously once you bring what we've learned to the higher ups, Lucas, Rebecca, they will contact the other precinct and they will free Victor. And like, you can just play it by then. That's when they realize that there's going to be future murders. And you can tell that the semblance of the show is now how Alfred and Thomas are going to be dependent on each other in order to solve this thing, to not only just free Victor, but also, track down who this guy is.
Well, yeah, and it seems like Alfred kind of would have had to have been in the show for him to have left, like, after the first episode. I think you probably would have been kind of off your nose to spite your face. It does remind me also of Mark Millar with Nemesis Volume 2. That was a comic book, but the whole entire thing about going after cops and, like, kind of specifically and trying to track the murders that way, I thought it was kind of reminiscent to that.
Who was going after cops in the comics?
Nemesis follows a villain, and
Mhm.
so he's the one.
Oh, so you see it from the other perspective.
Yes, right.
That would be a twist if Thomas ends up being the killer. I don't think it's going that way. In fact, they do kind of the pit scenario where once he finds out about the fallen officers, fallen brothers in blue in his precinct, he goes and he gets everybody in a big circle and they talk about it. And he talks to Max and Natalie and the rest of the gang, just about like what that means to them and how they're going to track down this guy.
So is this like trauma bonding?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say trauma bonding. I would say more just like everybody feeling that they have someone support
Right.
with each other. One of the people, so like the main character, as much as Alfred is posed to be a misanthrope, they literally call him that in the show. Thomas has kind of, I guess, genetically gotten a predisposition to being a little bit of a jerk. So, like, Lucas gives him the option to bring one of his staff aboard for this investigation. And at first, he's going to go with Max, who's the veteran, like, second in command. But then he goes to Max's soccer match to, like, tell him all that he's learned. And he sees Max being dorky. And he kind of just immediately calls Natalie, who's the newbie on the staff, and he's like, "No, I'd rather have you." Like, I know they posed it in a way that was like, Max is too lighthearted. He wouldn't push back. He would just be a yes man, and you would actually challenge me. But it read a little different when he saw Max give him the nod from the soccer field, and he was just like, "I am out of this." The other instance is that we see his 45th birthday party, and he tells his daughter, who's wanting to see the grandfather, Alfred. Alfred had kind of said that he would show up. That Thomas was going to go and check on Alfred to bring him to the
Right.
party, and then Thomas goes to Alfred's, and it's immediately apparent because Alfred even says, "You wouldn't be here unless you wanted something," and Thomas agrees. And then they get into the case, and he completely ditches his 45th birthday party. His
Yeah.
wife is there, his daughter's there, his other relatives are there, and he spends the rest of the night hanging out with Alfred and his little train set, talking about these dead cops.
But did the show not want you to realize that?
I think it was kind of an under like element. It's more just I like to see them hanging out, but at the same time, I was thinking, if you really think about it, Charlotte's gotten a bad stick here. Anyways, then yes, we've talked about the clues, we talked about the main character. I think the side characters, they did a good job kind of in showing without giving them separate scenes. I really don't like shows that are too filled with like all these superfluous
Where the B and C stories usually are
yeah.
just added for, and they don't impact the plot at
I
all.
said it was a tight 45 minutes. I meant it because you do get a sense of who everyone is while also primarily sticking with Thomas's point of view, which is really healthy for a show like this. And ultimately, it is about catching the serial killer, but it's also about mending the father-son relationship. So I can see how the show was pitched. Two nitpicks that I have is that ex-cop Alfred, when they are at the crime scene at the very end of the episode, sees the tape recording cassette box on the table in the crime scene
Right.
room, and he just picks it up with his bare hands because
No gloves.
he's so excited that they've just confirmed their hypothesis, which was that Marina's voice was used on the first 911 phone call, and then the second 911 phone call, which they are determining is happening right then and there,
Yeah.
will have Helena's voice on it as she died, which is creepy as heck. But like, you would think that he would still have used some form of just tweezers or something,
Especially when you realize that's
or
such
Thomas would
big
have,
evidence. Yeah.
yeah, or Thomas would have stopped him. You know, because the Thomas is like the lead, he's the lead detective. He would see that and he'd be like, "Dad, you can't grab that with your bare hands." The second nitpick that I would this is more just suspense of reality. Like, two incidents where police officers are killed in the middle of the night. You would think that happening within weeks of each other. You would think that even though there's someone that they were already pegging with one of the murders, that Thomas wouldn't be the only cop to draw the connection.
Right.
Like, he's not a super genius. Like, that just seems apparent that even the cops in the precinct with Victor would have probably wanted to figure out what was going on in this Stockholm case so that they could be sure about the guy in there. But
It does.
instead, it's presented in a way where it's like Thomas is the only dude who knows about it, and that was a little hard to believe.
It makes yeah, I was questioning because you were talking about how, like, the police chief only allowed him to add one person
Lucas,
onto the
and
case.
Alfred hates Lucas too.
Right.
He
But, like, why exactly when it is, like, so close to home would there be, I feel like, so little focus on trying to actually catch this person?
I think it's mostly because the prosecution wants to shelve this up and quickly dispel the notion to the public that they're in danger. You know, as soon as they've caught a guy, they want to put him in jail and say he'll never do this again. If there's another case with another murderer, that's up to the other precinct. But it's like all the police work together, but at the same time, they're very self-conscious about getting mistakes wrong because then they'd have to roll back everything they've said about Victor. So it'll be interesting when Thomas does get in a one-to-one with that guy and hear, because they must have had evidence to catch him to begin with. Overall, though, 7.5 out of 10.
7.5.
There was some blood. I don't think it's enough blood to call this a blood sacrifice quite yet. And it feels like just a very solid crime drama. It's not True Detective. It's not going to blow you away. But at the same time, foreign detective shows tend to be better on Netflix than the English speaking ones. I found. Did you agree?
They often well, I know that Swedish shows on Netflix often are more popular. And
Okay.
so, yeah, I did read about that. I'm
The
not
Killing, I mean, right?
Yeah, well, director Christopher Nahom, he directed all 5 episodes. His claim to fame is being the lead director for the original The Killing.
Yeah, but
You know,
that one was a version of where the American version was actually pretty good too. Like,
right, did you ever see the original version?
no, I never saw the original one. I know the American one was really well liked until the end of the first season, and then they felt like they kind of screwed up the finale there. But it went like 3 seasons, and I think overall it was pretty good. That had Joel Kinnaman in it.
Yeah, I
That was the
remember.
beginning of his career. And then, yeah, the last thing I'll throw your way is that today was also the day that ramen was first put on the shelves. Like, obviously, ramen noodles
The
have been
small
around
little
forever.
packages?
Yeah, but in packages in Japan, August 25th, I think it was in like the 50s or 60s. This was the first time where it was actually on the shelves for
Were
people
they
to buy.
just as inexpensive? Were they still
Oh,
the
they were probably a little less expensive, I would assume. All right. Well, unless you have any other questions, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.